I thought I was being generous by buying my parents a dream vacation home in the mountains. What I didn't expect was for my entitled sisters to turn it into their personal cash cow behind my back. Now, you know that feeling when you think you're doing something incredibly thoughtful for your family, only to discover they've been stabbing you in the back for years? Well, buckle up, because this story is going to take you on a wild ride that ends with criminal charges, broken family bonds, and a lesson I'll never forget about setting boundaries. My name's not important, but what is important is that I'm a guy who worked his ass off to build a successful career. My wife and I are child-free, we're smart with money, and we've been blessed enough to afford some luxuries that my sisters, well, let's just say they've always been a little jealous of our lifestyle. So when I had the opportunity to buy my parents their dream vacation home in the mountains, a beautiful property with killer views that they could never afford on their retirement income, I thought I was being the perfect son. I kept the ownership quiet to avoid family drama, let my folks manage it, and was happy knowing they could finally have the getaway place they'd always wanted. But here's the thing about entitled family members. Give them an inch, and they'll take a mile. Then they'll try to charge rent for that mile. For 3 years, my sisters had been secretly renting out my vacation home to strangers, pocketing thousands of dollars, while my parents thought they were just having innocent family getaways. And when I finally discovered their little side business and cut off their access, that's when things got really ugly. We're talking break-ins, destruction of property, and criminal charges that are still pending as I write this. Sometimes, the people you trust most are the ones who will hurt you the deepest. Let me paint you a picture of how this all started, because understanding the family dynamics is crucial to seeing just how twisted this whole situation became. I'm in my early 40s, married to an amazing woman who comes from a well-off family, and we've made the conscious decision to remain child-free. That choice alone has always been a source of tension with my two sisters, who are 8 and 10 years older than me and both have multiple kids. They're the type who think everyone should follow their life path, and our decision to focus on our careers and financial independence instead of having children has always rubbed them the wrong way. My wife and I are both professionals with solid careers. I won't get into specifics, but let's just say we've been fortunate financially. More importantly, we're responsible with money. We invest like demons, we don't buy things we can't afford, and we plan for the future. This stands in stark contrast to my sisters, who are both stay-at-home moms, married to guys who make decent money but seem to spend every penny they earn and then some. My parents are in their 70s now, retired, and they're the kind of people who love hosting gatherings. Dad's a former salesman who genuinely enjoys being around people, and Mom's always been the type to organize family get-togethers. They have this classic, great-for-entertaining house with a pool, and they're constantly coming up with reasons to have everyone over. 4th of July parties, fake holiday celebrations, random barbecues, you name it, they'll host it. Here's the thing about my folks. They're wonderful people, but they've never been great with money. I've been doing their taxes for years, so I know their financial situation inside and out. Their house is paid off, they have minimal debt, Dad gets a solid pension plus Social Security, but there's no treasure chest hidden away. They live comfortably but modestly, and they definitely couldn't afford luxuries like vacation homes or fancy cars. That's where I come in. A few years back, I was in a position to help them out in a big way. I'd sold my loft when I moved in with my wife, got a massive bonus at work the same year, and between being smart with investments and not having the expenses that come with kids, I had the opportunity to do something special for them. My parents had always dreamed of having a place in the mountains. Nothing crazy, elaborate, just a getaway spot where they could relax, have family gatherings, and enjoy their retirement. So I bought them one. It's a beautiful property at the end of a private road with killer views, sitting on 3 lots that could easily accommodate multiple houses if someone wanted to develop it further. Now, here's where it gets interesting. We decided to keep the ownership quiet. Officially, as far as my sisters knew, this was Mom and Dad's place. They controlled who used it, when, they handled the day-to-day management, and I just quietly covered all the operating costs, taxes, and maintenance behind the scenes. My parents were completely on board with this arrangement because they knew, that if my sisters found out I was the actual owner, it would create massive drama. See, my sisters have always been somewhat envious of our lifestyle. They don't hide it well. While they're driving cars full of kid debris and dealing with the constant financial strain of raising multiple children, my wife and I are taking nice trips once or twice a year, living in a beautiful home, and generally enjoying the freedom that comes with our choices. It definitely grates on both sisters and, by extension, their husbands. The vacation home became a regular part of the family routine. My sisters and their families would use it for weekend getaways. The kids loved it up there, and it seemed like everyone was happy with the arrangement. My parents got their dream retirement spot, my sisters got access to a beautiful vacation home they could never afford, and I got the satisfaction of knowing I'd done something meaningful for my family. My relationship with my sisters has always been complicated. The age gap meant we were never particularly close growing up, and as adults, we just don't have much in common. Their husbands are okay guys, but I honestly don't give a crap about the things that are important to them and vice versa. One of them is obsessed with his truck. He even has a tattoo of the truck company's logo, which should tell you everything you need to know about his priorities. The other one makes good money, but somehow they're always struggling financially. We maintain a polite relationship for family events, but if I'm being honest, my wife and I don't particularly enjoy their company. There's always this undercurrent of resentment about our financial situation, little passive-aggressive comments about us being elitist or not understanding real family responsibilities. It's exhausting, which is why we often try to skip family gatherings when possible. But my wife is more tolerant and forgiving than I am, and she usually talks me into showing up to keep the peace with my parents. Mom has a way of guilting us into attending these things, and we generally go along with it because we love my folks and want them to be happy. The vacation home seemed like the perfect solution to keep everyone happy. My parents got something they'd always wanted. My sisters got access to a luxury they couldn't afford, and I got to stay in the background while everyone enjoyed the benefits of my generosity. What I didn't realize was that my sisters had their own plans for my generosity. Plans that had nothing to do with family bonding and everything to do with cold, hard cash. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about how the cracks in this perfect arrangement started to show. But the cracks in our family dynamics started showing long before this vacation home drama. And looking back, I should have seen the warning signs much earlier. The resentment from my sisters didn't happen overnight. It's been building for years, starting way back when I bought my first place, a loft in the city when I was just 25. At that point, neither of my sisters owned homes yet, though they'd both met their future husbands. The fact that their younger brother managed to buy property before they did clearly didn't sit well with them, and I started hearing little comments about how lucky I was, how easy I had it without responsibilities. Things got worse when I met my wife. She comes from money, not obscenely wealthy, but her family is definitely well off. My sisters immediately latched onto that. Suddenly, every success I had was attributed to my wife's family connections or money, never my own hard work. When we got married, the wedding was nice but reasonable, yet I could see the envy in their eyes the entire time. They made comments about it being fancy and over the top, even though it was honestly pretty standard for our social circle. The real turning point came when I moved in with my wife after we got married. Her condo was close to where she was doing her fellowship, so it made sense for me to sell the loft and move in with her. The profit from that sale, combined with not having a house payment and our dual professional incomes, put us in a really strong financial position. That's what eventually enabled me to buy the vacation home for my parents. But my sisters saw it differently. To them, I was just some guy who got lucky by marrying into money and now thought I was better than everyone else. They started using words like elitist and making snide remarks about how we wouldn't understand what it's like to have real family responsibilities. The irony, of course, is that most of our financial success came from the choices we made. Being responsible with money, investing wisely, and yes, choosing not to have children. Meanwhile, both of my sisters were living completely different lifestyles. The older one, let's call her Sarah, has 3 kids and has always been what you might call high maintenance. She's the type who needs to have the latest everything. Designer handbags, expensive cars, the whole suburban status symbol package. Her husband makes decent money, but they spend every penny and then some. They lease expensive SUVs they can't really afford, buy toys like jet skis that sit unused most of the year, and generally live paycheck to paycheck despite having a 6-figure household income. My middle sister, let's call her Lisa, has 2 kids and is slightly more reasonable with money, but not by much. Her husband has a good job that requires security clearance, so he's generally more stable, but they also seem to prioritize lifestyle over savings. Both families are the type who would rather look successful than actually be financially secure. The vacation home initially seemed to smooth over some of these tensions. My parents were thrilled to have a place in the mountains, and my sisters loved having access to what was essentially a luxury vacation rental for free. The kids adored it up there, the husbands could use it as a base camp for hunting trips, and everyone seemed happy with the arrangement. But I started noticing little things that, in hindsight, should have been red flags. My sisters became very possessive about their weekends at the house. They'd get annoyed if my parents wanted to use it during times they'd planned to be there, even though it was supposed to be Mom and Dad's place. They started talking about the property like they had some kind of ownership stake in it, making comments about our family cabin, and discussing long-term plans for the place. The first real warning sign came about a year ago when I drove up to the house to drop off an ATV I'd been working on. I wasn't expected, just figured I'd leave it in the barn and head back home. But when I got there, I found a family I'd never seen before hanging out on the deck like they owned the place. When I asked who they were, they seemed confused and said they were staying there with my sister Lisa and her family, but that Lisa had gone into town for supplies and would be back soon. I thought it was weird. Lisa hadn't mentioned having friends up there, and my parents certainly hadn't said anything about it, but I figured maybe she'd invited some friends for a joint vacation or something, so I just dropped off the ATV and left. I mentioned it to my parents later, casually, and they seemed surprised. They said Lisa hadn't told them about bringing friends, but they didn't make a big deal about it. My dad just shrugged and said maybe she'd forgotten to mention it. At the time, I let it go, but something about the whole situation felt off. Then there were the phone calls. Both sisters started calling my parents more frequently to check on the house and asking detailed questions about the booking calendar. They wanted to know who was planning to use it, when, whether certain weekends were available, and they seemed unusually interested in the logistics of managing the property. Again, I thought they were just being helpful, maybe trying to coordinate family gatherings better. But the biggest red flag was how defensive they became whenever anyone mentioned the house in casual conversation. If someone at a family gathering commented on how nice it must be to have access to a mountain retreat, my sisters would quickly change the subject or make dismissive comments about how it was just a simple cabin and not that big a deal. For people who supposedly loved the place, they seemed awfully eager to downplay it in front of others. Little did I know they were already running their own private business out of my generosity, and I was about to discover just how deep their deception went. The first real crack in their facade came during what should have been a routine family barbecue at my parents' house. What started as a typical suburban gathering turned into a preview of the chaos that was about to consume our family. It was a hot summer day, and my folks had decided to host one of their classic backyard barbecues. You know the type. About 20 people, a mix of neighbors and family, kids running around the pool, and my dad strategically positioned in the hot tub with a cooler full of beers. My wife and I almost didn't go because, honestly, we'd been trying to avoid these family gatherings. But Mom worked her guilt magic on my wife, and we ended up showing up about 45 minutes late. By the time we arrived, my sisters and their husbands were already solidly buzzed, and I mean drunk, not just tipsy. Their kids, ages 7 to 11, were running completely wild while my mom spent 100% of her time trying to keep them under some semblance of control. It was chaos, but typical family gathering chaos, so I didn't think much of it initially. That's when I witnessed something that should have been a massive warning sign. I was standing near the pool, making small talk with one of the neighbors, when 3 of the kids came running at full speed toward this poor woman who was just standing by the pool steps. They straight up pushed her, trying to knock her into the water. She stumbled, but managed to catch herself, so she only got half wet, but she was clearly pissed. Instead of making a scene, she just grabbed some towels, dried herself off, and left the party entirely. Here's the kicker. My sisters and their husbands thought this was absolutely hilarious. They were laughing and high-fiving like their kids had just performed some amazing comedy routine instead of assaulting a guest. No apologies, no discipline for the kids, nothing. Just pure amusement at someone else's expense. About 20 minutes later, I saw the same 3 kids eyeing me from across the yard, and I could tell from their body language exactly what they were planning. They started running at me full tilt, obviously intending to give me the same treatment they'd given the neighbor lady. Now, it's not exactly difficult to outwit young kids, so I just stepped aside at the last second. All 3 of them went flying straight into the pool at full speed. Most of the adults, including my wife and me, started laughing because, let's be honest, it was pretty funny watching these little troublemakers get a taste of their own medicine. But their mothers, who, remember, were pretty shit-faced at this point, absolutely lost their minds. Suddenly, they're screaming that 2 of the kids couldn't actually swim, even though they were wearing swimsuits and had been running around a pool all day. Since I wasn't in swim gear, I stepped back and let other people fish the kids out of the water. The kids were crying like they'd lost limbs, and that's when all hell broke loose. The 4 drunk parents started yelling at everyone in general and me in particular for nearly letting their kids drown. But here's the really infuriating part. 2 of the kids had been recording their little prank attempt on their parents' iPhones, which were now sitting at the bottom of the pool. And one of my brothers-in-law actually got into the pool to try to retrieve the phones, but between his BMI and his blood alcohol content, that was a lost cause. Nobody else volunteered to help, which was unsurprising given that my sisters were still bitching at everyone about the whole situation. I finally had enough and told my sisters point blank that it was their job to watch their kids, and if anything had happened to them, it would have been their responsibility, not mine. That led to some pretty strong words on both sides, with them accusing me of being a selfish asshole who didn't understand family responsibilities, and me pointing out that maybe they should try actually parenting their children instead of getting drunk and letting them terrorize other guests. The whole thing culminated when the other brother-in-law, who was still yelling at us, fell over and face-planted while trying to gesture dramatically. My wife and I decided that was our cue to leave, but not before my sisters made it crystal clear that I should have just let their little angels knock me into the pool and ruin my phone so they could have their fun. The aftermath of that barbecue was telling. Later that evening, my sister started a group text that included some really nasty comments about my wife and me. Their husbands jumped in with their own charming observations about our character. The language was bad enough that my parents, who were also in the chat, were genuinely upset by what they were seeing. My wife and I blocked all 4 of them immediately, but the damage was done. My mom called me the next day, pretty shaken up by the whole thing. She said she'd never seen that side of my sisters before, and she was embarrassed by how they'd behaved both at the party and in the group chat. My parents actually insisted that my sisters and their husbands come over the next day, without the kids, to get some things straight and lay down some ground rules. The result was a half-hearted apology delivered through my mom's phone, with my sisters and their husbands clearly just going through the motions to smooth things over with our parents. I thought that was the end of it, so I unblocked them that evening. Big mistake. Within hours, I got a text from one of the brothers-in-law telling me that the phones that had ended up in the pool cost $4,000 and asking when I'd be paying for them. $4,000 for phones that their kids destroyed while trying to assault me at a family gathering. I replied with a simple never, took a screenshot of his text, and forwarded it to my parents with a note that we were done with this nonsense. Then I blocked all 4 of them again, this time permanently. That's when things really hit the fan. My dad called them and absolutely ripped them a new one. Among other things, he told them that the grandkids were not welcome at his place indefinitely, which was a huge deal because my mom regularly provides free babysitting. He also banned them from using the vacation house. But here's the bombshell that changed everything. In his anger, my dad let slip that my wife and I actually owned the vacation house, not him and Mom. This completely freaked my sisters out. Both of their families had been using the place regularly, including having their friends up for weekend getaways. They'd been treating it like their own personal vacation rental. And suddenly they realized that their younger brother, the one they'd been calling selfish and elitist, actually owned the property they'd been enjoying for years. The revelation that we'd kept the ownership quiet to avoid exactly this kind of drama just made them angrier. They felt deceived, even though the deception had been specifically designed to prevent them from acting entitled about a property they had no claim to. Within a couple of days, both sisters and their husbands showed up at our house unannounced, wanting to apologize in person, and undoubtedly hoping to smooth things over so they could regain access to the vacation house. We were out to dinner, so they left a note. One sister also called me at work, but I sent her straight to voicemail. At that point, my wife and I decided that going no contact was the best thing for our sanity and our marriage. We had no idea that cutting off their access to the vacation house would drive them to do something truly desperate and stupid. The day my world turned upside down started with what I thought was just another routine phone call from my mom. I had no idea I was about to discover betrayal so deep it would shatter our family forever. It was a Tuesday afternoon, about 3 weeks into our no-contact period with my sisters. Things had been blissfully peaceful. I hadn't realized how much ongoing low-level drama they'd been creating in our lives until it was gone. My wife and I were actually starting to feel like ourselves again, and I was beginning to think maybe this whole situation would just blow over naturally. Then my mom called, and I could tell immediately from her voice that something was seriously wrong. She sounded shaky, upset, and when I asked what was going on, she said she needed to tell me something about the vacation house that I wasn't going to like. "Your sister Sarah came to see us yesterday," she began, and I could hear her taking a deep breath like she was preparing to deliver bad news. "She's in trouble, honey, real financial trouble, and she told us something that your father and I are having a hard time processing." My stomach dropped. I had a feeling I knew where this was going, but I hoped I was wrong. "She's been renting out the house," Mom said quietly. "Not just to friends, to strangers, for money. She says she's been doing it for about 3 years." The words hit me like a physical blow. 3 years. 3 fucking years of my sister running an illegal rental business out of the property I'd bought for my parents, pocketing thousands of dollars while pretending it was just innocent family getaways. But Mom wasn't done. She says she's been getting $2,000 for weekends, sometimes $4,000 or more for a full week. She's had to cancel a booking because she can't use the house anymore, and she's worried about losing everything. I was speechless, literally could not form words. My generous gift to my parents had been turned into my sister's personal ATM, and she'd been lying to all of us for years about it. "There's more," Mom continued, her voice getting smaller. "Lisa knew about it. She's been doing the same thing, just not as often. And they've both been telling people it's their family cabin, like they have some kind of ownership in it. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I actually felt physically sick. These weren't desperate people making a one-time bad decision. This was a systematic long-term fraud operation using my property, my money, and my parents' trust. "How much money are we talking about here?" I managed to ask. "Sarah says she's made at least $50,000 over the 3 years, maybe more. She didn't keep good records because she didn't want to pay taxes on it. Lisa won't say how much she's made, but Sarah thinks it's probably around $20,000. $70,000. My sisters had stolen $70,000 from me by illegally renting out my property. And they'd done it while looking me in the eye at family gatherings and acting like they were just grateful for the occasional family vacation. But the real kicker was still coming. "Your father is beside himself," Mom said, "not just about the money, but about the liability. What if someone had gotten hurt up there? What if there had been property damage? We had no idea strangers were using the place, so we never would have known to check on things or make sure everything was secure. She was right. The insurance implications alone were staggering. If someone had been injured on the property during one of these illegal rentals, my parents could have been sued for everything they had. My sisters had put our entire family at financial risk for their personal profit. There's something else, Mom continued, and I could hear her starting to cry. Sarah came to us because she needs money. A lot of money. She and her husband are in serious financial trouble. They've maxed out their credit cards, they're behind on their car payments, and one of their vehicles is about to be repossessed. She was hoping we could loan them money, and when we told her we don't have that kind of cash, she asked if we thought you might help them. The audacity was breathtaking. My sister had been stealing from me for 3 years, and now she wanted me to bail her out of the financial hole she'd dug for herself. What did you tell her? I asked. I told her she needed to come clean with you about everything and hope you'd be willing to work something out. But honestly, honey, your father and I are so angry and disappointed right now that we don't even know what to think. After I hung up with Mom, I sat in my car in the office parking lot for probably 20 minutes, just trying to process what I'd learned. The scope of the deception was mind-blowing. Every time my sisters had used the house, I'd wondered if they were running their rental scam. Every family gathering where they'd acted grateful for access to the property, they'd been secretly profiting from it. Every time they'd made snide comments about my financial success, they'd been literally stealing from me. But I knew this was just the beginning. If my sisters were desperate enough to confess to my parents, they were going to come after me next, and they weren't going to take no for an answer. I was right. 2 days later, both sisters showed up at my house again, this time without their husbands. They waited outside until I got home from work, and I had to make a choice. Deal with them in public where they might make a scene, or let them inside where I could control the conversation. I let them in, which was probably a mistake. What followed was the most surreal conversation of my life. Sarah, the older sister, launched into this elaborate sob story about how they were going to lose everything, how her husband's business was struggling, how they had 3 kids to think about. She painted herself as a victim of circumstances, like the rental income was the only thing standing between her family and financial ruin. We never meant for it to become a big thing, she said, tears streaming down her face. It started when some friends asked if they could use the house for a weekend and offered to pay for utilities and cleaning. Then word got out and people started offering real money. We thought, what's the harm? The house was just sitting empty most of the time anyway. Lisa, the middle sister, was nodding along, playing the supportive sister role. We always took really good care of the place, she added. We made sure our renters were respectful and we cleaned everything thoroughly after each stay. We never thought of it as stealing because we were maintaining the property. But then came the real kicker. The demand that made my blood boil. Look, Sarah said, leaning forward with this desperate intensity. I know you're upset, and I understand why. But we need you to let us use the house again, just until we get back on our feet financially. We have people who are counting on us, and if we can't deliver, we're going to lose everything. I stared at her in disbelief. You want me to let you continue running an illegal rental business out of my property so you can pay off the debts you accumulated while stealing from me? It's not stealing, Lisa jumped in. It's family property. We're family. You bought it for all of us to use. I bought it for Mom and Dad, I said coldly. You've been committing fraud for 3 years. That's when Sarah played her final card. You've always been a shitty brother, she said, her tears suddenly drying up and her voice turning hard. You've had every advantage in life and you've never once stepped up to help your family when we needed it. Now we're asking you to do the right thing, and you're acting like we're criminals. You are criminals, I replied. You've been running an unlicensed rental business on property you don't own, not paying taxes on the income, and putting our parents at legal risk. That's literally criminal behavior. But Sarah wasn't done. Fine, she said, standing up. If you won't help us voluntarily, then you need to know that we're not going to just disappear quietly. We've been part of this family longer than your wife has, and we have just as much right to that house as anyone. If you think you can just cut us off and pretend we don't exist, you're wrong. The threat was clear, even if it wasn't explicitly stated. They were going to fight me for access to the house, and they were going to make it as ugly as possible. After they left, I took a long shower and tried to process what had just happened. My sisters hadn't come to apologize or make amends. They'd come to demand that I enable their continued theft and to threaten me if I didn't comply. That's when I realized this wasn't going to end with a family conversation or a heartfelt apology. My sisters were desperate, entitled, and clearly willing to do whatever it took to get what they wanted. I just had no idea how far they were willing to go. I thought securing the property would end their delusions of entitlement. I was dead wrong. What happened next proved that desperate people will do incredibly stupid things when they feel cornered. After that confrontation at my house, I knew I had to take serious action to protect the property. My sisters had made it clear they weren't going to respect boundaries, and their veiled threats told me everything I needed to know about their intentions. So I went into full lockdown mode. First, I drove up to the vacation house and installed a heavy-duty chain and the best padlock I could find on the entrance gate. This wasn't some flimsy hardware store lock. I'm talking about a serious security-grade padlock that would require power tools to break. I also put up new no trespassing signs and made it clear that the property was under surveillance. Next, I had a security system installed with cameras covering all the main access points. The installer convinced me to add a high-resolution camera that looks out over the valley, which actually turned out to be pretty cool, but the real purpose was security. The system sends alerts to my phone whenever there's movement on the property, and everything is recorded in the cloud. I also did a complete reset on all the door keypads and created entirely new access codes. Only my wife, my parents, and I had the new codes. As an extra precaution, I installed a heavy-duty lockout on the main water shutoff valve and took the only keys. If someone somehow got into the house, they'd find themselves without running water pretty quickly. The final step was hiring a property manager named David, who lives in the area. For $450 a month, he does weekly checks on the property, has access to the camera feeds, and can handle basic maintenance. The guy's a former big city cop who moved to the mountains after being shot on duty, and he's friends with all the local sheriff's deputies. Having him involved gave me serious peace of mind. For about 6 weeks, things were quiet. My sisters tried calling from different numbers, but we'd gotten into the habit of not answering calls from numbers we didn't recognize. They left voicemails demanding that I meet with them for our parents' sake to work out a sharing arrangement for the family vacation home. But I ignored all of it. My parents told me that Sarah and her husband were starting to face the financial consequences of their situation. They'd gotten out of their expensive car leases and were driving older, smaller vehicles. They'd sold their jet skis and other toys they'd never really needed. For someone whose identity was wrapped up in looking successful, this was clearly devastating for Sarah. But I underestimated just how desperate they'd become. It was the Friday after Thanksgiving when everything went to hell. My wife and I were spending the day with her parents, enjoying a relaxing holiday in full vacation mode. We'd left our phones in the car so we could disconnect completely and just enjoy family time. That's when my brothers-in-law decided to take matters into their own hands. They drove up to the vacation house with an angle grinder, a fucking angle grinder, and cut through the chain on the gate, damaging the gate itself in the process. They tried to get in through the front door first, completely ruining the lock set and gouging deep scratches into the door. When that didn't work, they broke in through the utility room door and then had to break through another locked internal door to get into the main house. But here's where their plan fell apart. David, my property manager, gets instant notifications from the camera system when there's activity. He saw what was happening in real time and immediately called the sheriff's department. By the time my brothers-in-law finished breaking into the house and came back out through the front door, they were met by sheriff's deputies. According to David, they tried to talk their way out of it, claiming it was all a misunderstanding and that they had permission to be there. But breaking into an empty house in a rural area is taken very seriously. It's usually meth heads who ransack places and steal everything that's not nailed down. The deputies weren't buying their story for a second. When they were arrested, my brothers-in-law completely lost their shit. They started yelling about how they were going to beat the hell out of me, making threats in front of the cops, which, as you can imagine, didn't help their case at all. They were booked on breaking and entering, destruction of property, and communicating threats, all Class 1 misdemeanors. Meanwhile, my sisters were getting frantic phone calls from jail. They tried calling my parents, tried calling me, they're blocked, and scrambled to find a lawyer in a rural area on a holiday weekend. Sarah had zero cash and maxed out credit cards, so if they were going to make bail, Lisa would have had to pay for both husbands. We didn't discover any of this until late Friday evening when we finally checked our phones on the way home from the in-laws. There were dozens of missed calls and messages from my mom, dad, David, and the sheriff's department. Talk about ruining a perfect day. I went from completely relaxed to absolutely furious in the span of about 10 minutes. I called David first to get the full story, and the photos he sent me of the damage made my blood boil. It was so senseless, so destructive. These weren't desperate people making a mistake. This was calculated vandalism by two grown men who thought they could intimidate me into giving them what they wanted. I ended that horrible Friday by calling the sheriff's department and making it crystal clear that there was no misunderstanding. My brothers-in-law had absolutely no right to be on my property, and I wanted to press charges to the fullest extent of the law. As I lay in bed that night, barely able to sleep, I realized that this wasn't just about money or property anymore. This was about two men who thought they could destroy my things and threaten me with violence to get what they wanted. The gloves were officially off. Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who will stab you in the back, and the hardest lesson I've learned is that blood doesn't automatically make someone family. Sitting in that sheriff's office, looking at photos of my destroyed property while filing criminal charges against my own brothers-in-law, I had a moment of clarity that I'll never forget. This wasn't just about a vacation house or money anymore. This was about fundamental values. respect, and the toxic sense of entitlement that had been festering in my family for years. The first lesson hit me like a freight train. Generosity without boundaries is just enabling bad behavior. For years, I told myself I was being the good son, the generous brother, by quietly funding this vacation home and letting everyone enjoy it without knowing the true cost. I thought I was avoiding drama by keeping the ownership secret, but what I was really doing was creating a situation where my sisters felt entitled to something they'd never earned or paid for. When you give people something for free, especially something valuable, some of them will start to see it as their right rather than your gift. My sisters didn't just use the house, they claimed ownership of it in their minds. They made plans around it, built their social lives around it, and eventually turned it into a business because they genuinely believed they deserved to profit from my generosity. The second lesson was about family dynamics and the danger of trying to keep the peace at all costs. My wife and I had been avoiding family gatherings for years because we found my sisters exhausting, but we kept showing up because we didn't want to upset my parents. We tolerated passive-aggressive comments, entitled behavior, and general disrespect because that's what family does. But here's the thing. That's not what family does. Real family members don't steal from each other for 3 years while looking you in the eye and pretending to be grateful. Real family members don't threaten violence when they don't get their way. Real family members don't put elderly parents at legal and financial risk for their personal profit. I realized that my definition of family loyalty had been completely one-sided. I was expected to be understanding, forgiving, and generous, while my sisters were allowed to be selfish, entitled, and dishonest. That's not family. That's exploitation with a blood relation attached. The third lesson was about the true cost of avoiding conflict. I'd spent years trying to minimize drama, thinking that keeping the peace was worth the ongoing stress and resentment. But conflict avoidance doesn't actually avoid conflict. It just delays it and makes it worse when it finally explodes. If I'd been honest about owning the house from the beginning, if I'd set clear boundaries about its use, if I'd addressed my sister's entitled behavior years ago, none of this would have happened. My attempt to be the nice guy who keeps everyone happy actually enabled the very behavior that destroyed our family relationships. The fourth lesson hit me in the gut. You can't save people from the consequences of their own choices. Sarah and her husband were in financial trouble because they'd been living beyond their means for years, not because of some external crisis. They'd chosen to lease expensive cars they couldn't afford, buy toys they didn't need, and spend every penny they earned instead of saving for the future. Their financial problems weren't my responsibility to solve, and their illegal rental scheme wasn't a desperate survival strategy. It was theft, plain and simple. By trying to understand their situation and make excuses for their behavior, I was actually enabling them to avoid taking responsibility for their choices. The fifth lesson was about the importance of consequences. For years, my sisters had faced no real repercussions for their entitled behavior. They could make snide comments, act ungrateful, and generally be unpleasant, and the worst that would happen is that I'd avoid them for a while. They'd learned that they could push boundaries without facing any meaningful consequences. But when they finally crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, criminal behavior, suddenly consequences became very real. Jail time, criminal records, job security, financial ruin, all the things they should have been worried about before they decided to take an angle grinder to my property. The final lesson was perhaps the most painful. Sometimes protecting yourself means accepting that relationships are over. I'd spent my entire adult life trying to maintain some kind of relationship with my sisters because I thought that's what you're supposed to do with family. But some relationships are so toxic, so one-sided, and so destructive that the healthiest thing you can do is walk away completely. My marriage, my mental health, and my financial security were all more important than maintaining a facade of family harmony with people who clearly didn't respect me or care about my well-being. The hardest part wasn't pressing charges or cutting contact. It was accepting that the family I'd been trying to preserve had never really existed in the first place. Today, as I write this update, my brothers-in-law are facing criminal charges, my sisters haven't spoken to me in months, and honestly, my life has never been more peaceful. It's been about 6 months since that nightmare weekend when everything exploded, and I wanted to give you all a final update on how this whole saga played out. Spoiler alert, sometimes standing your ground actually works, even when it feels like your world is falling apart. The legal situation resolved faster than I expected. My brothers-in-law, faced with the reality of criminal charges, potential jail time, and the very real possibility of losing their jobs, came to their senses pretty quickly. 3 days after their arrest, I received a courier-delivered envelope at my office containing a signed letter from both of them and a cashier's check for $5,000. The letter was actually a genuine apology. They acknowledged breaking in, admitted it was wrong, and agreed to pay for all damages plus my attorney fees. They also agreed to stay away from the vacation home permanently unless specifically invited by my wife and me. Most importantly, they asked me to help get the charges dropped because they both could lose their jobs, and they agreed to accept restraining orders if necessary. My attorney advised me to take the settlement. He said we could probably win a lawsuit, but it would take years and cost a fortune in legal fees, with no guarantee we'd ever see any money. The $5,000 covered the property damage, and getting them to sign a legal agreement admitting fault and agreeing to stay away was worth more than dragging this through the courts. The criminal charges were mostly dropped in exchange for guilty pleas to trespassing and payment of fines. They'll have misdemeanor records, but they kept their jobs. Honestly, I was fine with that outcome. I wanted accountability, not revenge. As for my sisters, we haven't spoken since that confrontation at my house, and I have zero plans to change that. They've tried calling from new numbers a few times, leaving voicemails about working things out for the family, but I'm done. The no-contact arrangement has been the best thing for my mental health and my marriage. My wife, who had been incredibly patient through this whole ordeal, finally reached her limit during the break-in incident. She told me flat out that she was done with my family's drama and that I needed to handle it permanently. Having her support to cut ties completely was exactly what I needed to stop second-guessing myself. The vacation house situation worked out better than I expected. My parents were initially upset about the family rift, but they've come to understand that my sister's behavior was inexcusable. They still use the house occasionally, and they've actually told me they enjoy the peace and quiet without the constant drama of managing my sister's schedules and demands. I kept David as the property manager, and he's been fantastic. He sends photos of wildlife and sunsets a couple times a week, handles maintenance issues, and gives me complete peace of mind about security. The camera system has been worth every penny. Not just for security, but for the amazing views of the valley that I can check anytime from my phone. Financially, my sisters apparently learned some hard lessons. Sarah and her husband downsized significantly. Older cars, no more expensive toys, and from what my parents tell me, a much more modest lifestyle. Whether they've actually learned to live within their means or are just temporarily broke, I don't know and don't care. The most surprising outcome has been how much better my relationship with my parents has become. Without the constant stress of managing my sister's drama and trying to keep everyone happy, our interactions are more genuine and relaxed. We have dinner together regularly, and for the first time in years, we can just enjoy each other's company without walking on eggshells. My marriage is stronger too. My wife has told me multiple times how proud she is of how I handled the situation, and removing that ongoing source of stress from our lives has been incredible. We're planning to use the vacation house more ourselves now, and we're actually looking forward to it instead of dreading potential family drama. Looking back, I wish I'd set boundaries years earlier. I wasted so much time and energy trying to maintain relationships with people who clearly didn't respect me or value what I was doing for them. The fear of family conflict kept me trapped in a situation that was slowly poisoning my life. To anyone dealing with entitled family members or toxic relationships, you don't owe anyone access to your generosity, your property, or your peace of mind just because you share DNA. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for them, is to let them face the consequences of their choices without your interference. Have you ever had family members try to profit off your generosity? Have you had to cut contact with toxic relatives? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes knowing you're not alone in dealing with this kind of family drama makes all the difference. Thanks for following this crazy journey with me. Here's to stronger boundaries and more peaceful lives.